I was fighting for my life in the ICU, tubes in my veins, machines keeping me alive. And while I lay there half dead, my own family wasn't praying for me. They were draining my pension and buying a luxury car. My name is Ruth Whitman. I'm 74 years old, and this is the story of how my greatest battle wasn't inside that hospital ward, but inside my own home. Before I begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I've found that no matter where we live, whether it's a small town or a bustling city, betrayal has the same sharp taste. The day everything began was supposed to be ordinary. I'd gone in for a checkup after feeling dizzy for weeks. I thought it might be low blood pressure or just fatigue, but within hours, I collapsed. The next thing I remember was waking up in the ICU, nurses moving quickly around me, a mask strapped to my face. My body felt heavy, as though the weight of my 74 years had finally caught up to me all at once. The doctors told me later it was a severe respiratory episode, the kind that can steal your breath in an instant. Recovery wouldn't be quick, they said. I'd need days of monitoring, endless tests, and medications strong enough to make me drowsy most of the time. From that hospital bed, I had a lot of time to think. I thought of my years as a school teacher, of standing in front of classrooms filled with children who didn't know how much I gave to give them a chance in life. I thought of the nights I graded papers until my fingers cramped, of the pennies I saved for decades so I'd never have to beg anyone for help in my old age. That pension wasn't a luxury. It was my lifeline, my independence. So you can imagine the ice that ran through me when, between drifting in and out of sleep, I overheard my son David's voice at my bedside. "She won't be here much longer," he whispered. Might as well put it to good use. Melissa, his wife, laughed softly. "That money's just sitting there. Why waste it? We deserve to live a little." I wanted to rip the mask off, sit up, and scream. But my body betrayed me. Too weak, too frail. I couldn't even lift a hand. All I could do was let their words sink deep, each syllable like a stone on my chest. They thought I couldn't hear. They thought I was as good as gone. The hospital was cold, but it wasn't half as cold as that realization. I stared at the ceiling tiles, fighting back tears, wondering how children I raised with love and sacrifice could reduce me to nothing more than a bank account. When David was young, I worked double shifts to buy him a second-hand bike. I skipped meals so Melissa could have a proper wedding dress when she married my son. Every decision, every sacrifice was for them. And now, while I was fighting for each breath, they were already spending my future. The next morning, when a nurse wheeled in my phone so I could call a friend, I noticed something odd. Notifications, dozens of them, flashing across the screen. Transactions, withdrawals, purchases. My pension account was being drained. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Fraud, maybe. A scam. But as I scrolled with shaking hands, I saw the details. Dealership names, car-related fees. A down payment had been made. For a luxury car. My son and his wife hadn't just talked about it. They had acted on it. And as I sat there in that bed, tethered to machines, something inside me shifted. The weakness I felt in my body didn't reach my mind. My heart might have been frail, but my will hardened like steel. If they thought I was going to fade away quietly, they didn't know me at all. Lying in that hospital bed, I felt like I had been split in two. One half of me was weak, fragile, tethered to wires and tubes, relying on machines to keep me alive. The other half, the part of me that was still Ruth Whitman, was burning. Burning with anger, disbelief, and the sharp sting of betrayal. I had spent decades believing that the love of family was unshakable, that no matter what storms came, David would protect me just as I had protected him when he was a child. Yet here I was, watching my life's savings vanish in digital notifications, each one a fresh cut across the trust I once held so tightly. The evidence was right in front of me. A down payment for a luxury vehicle, followed by withdrawals that made no sense for anyone on our modest incomes. I knew David didn't have the kind of job that supported purchases like that. Melissa had always dreamed bigger than her means, and now, apparently, they had found their golden ticket, my pension card. The strangest part was that, beneath the anger, there was a cold clarity. This wasn't some careless mistake. This wasn't an emergency where they needed money and thought they'd pay me back. No, they had counted me out. They had whispered it in the ICU, written me off as though I was already gone. I thought back to the sacrifices etched into the lines of my hands. The nights I sat at the kitchen table, sewing David's torn clothes so he wouldn't feel ashamed at school. The long evenings when Melissa first joined our family, how I stretched my budget to make sure she felt welcomed, buying her favorite foods, even slipping her money when I knew she and David were struggling. I had done those things gladly, out of love, and now that same love had been tossed aside like old scraps. The next day, when the doctor came in with his calm explanations about my recovery plan, I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, piecing together what I needed to do. But before I could act, I had to confirm it. I needed proof. When the nurse left my phone charging beside me, I waited until the ward was quiet, then pulled it close. My fingers trembled as I opened my banking app again, scrolling further back. That's when I saw it. The transfer to Melissa's account. Not even hidden. Bold as daylight. They hadn't even bothered to disguise it. A nurse walked past just then, adjusting the IV line on the patient beside me, and I quickly slipped the phone under the blanket. I felt shame burning in my chest, though it wasn't mine to carry. Why was I the one hiding, when they were the thieves? That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the machines hummed in the darkness, I heard them again. David's voice, low but edged with excitement. "Once the paperwork clears, we'll be set," he whispered. Melissa's voice followed, smoother, dripping with smugness. "Finally, something nice. We deserve this. And if she doesn't make it, well, it's already ours." I closed my eyes, but the tears slid down anyway. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. Cold. Calculated. They weren't planning for my recovery. They were planning for my absence. The morning after, a nurse told me cheerfully that my family had stepped out to run some errands. My stomach twisted. I knew exactly what those errands were. I asked her to pass me my handbag from the locker beside the bed. Inside, my pension card was missing. That was the final confirmation. The whispers, the transfers, the car payment. All of it came together in one cruel truth. My family had stolen from me, not because they needed to survive, but because they wanted to live lavishly while I was expected to fade away. I stared at the ceiling tiles, my heart steady now. Weak or not, I had a choice. I could sit quietly, let them drain every account, and leave me with nothing but hospital bills. Or I could fight back. I decided in that moment that my story would not end in silence. The first thing I did when I regained enough strength was ask the nurse for privacy. She looked at me strangely, but nodded and pulled the curtain around my bed. My hands shook as I dialed the number on the back of my bank card. Or rather, what used to be my card. A calm voice on the other end asked for my details. I took a deep breath. "My card has been stolen," I said firmly. "And I know who has it." I explained the withdrawals, the transfers, and the dealership payment. The representative's voice shifted from polite courtesy to careful seriousness. Within minutes, my pension account was frozen, every connected line of credit blocked. For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear. I felt control returning. But I didn't stop there. I requested statements for proof, digital copies sent to my email. With shaking fingers, I forwarded everything to my lawyer, a man named Samuel Reed, who had helped me years ago with drafting my will. He called me almost immediately. "Ruth, this is theft," he said, his voice firm. "Financial exploitation of the elderly. You understand this is a crime, don't you?" A crime. The word echoed in my ears. It wasn't just betrayal. It was illegal. Later that evening, I asked the nurse to connect me with the local police department. A young officer came to the hospital the following morning, his notepad ready. I told him everything. The whispers in the ICU, the missing card, the transactions, the luxury car. He wrote quickly, occasionally glancing up at me with a mixture of pity and respect. When I finished, he set his pen down. Mrs. Whitman, he said, you've done the right thing. We'll open a case. For now, don't let on that you know. If they think you're still unaware, we'll have more leverage. So that was the plan. I would play the frail old woman, quiet, trusting, unaware. But beneath that mask, I would be watching everything. It wasn't easy to sit in that hospital bed, pretending not to notice when Melissa walked in with a new designer handbag, or when David fiddled with car keys that glinted a little too brightly for our modest life. My blood boiled, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I leaned on the only person I trusted outside of law enforcement, my neighbor, Maria Alvarez. She'd been my friend for over 30 years, the kind of woman who knew when to knock on your door with soup and when to sit silently beside you. When she visited me at the hospital, I whispered everything. Her eyes flashed. Ruth, they don't deserve you. Don't you dare let them win. Her words steadied me. For decades, I'd been the one giving strength to others. Now, in this moment, Maria gave it back to me. The following week, I was discharged from the ICU into regular care. My body was still weak, but my spirit felt sharper than it had in years. David came to pick me up, his smile stretched too wide. Melissa sat in the passenger seat of their brand new car, its leather seats gleaming under the sun. Look, Mom, David said proudly. We wanted to surprise you. Isn't it beautiful? I ran my hand along the seat, hiding the tremor in my fingers. It certainly is, I murmured. I made sure my voice carried only admiration, not the storm brewing inside me. As the car pulled out of the hospital parking lot, I caught a glimpse of Maria watching from the curb. She gave me the smallest nod. She knew, and I knew. This wasn't a car ride home. This was the beginning of the trap. That evening, back in my house, I sat in my favorite chair with a blanket over my knees. David and Melissa busied themselves in the kitchen, opening cabinets, acting as though they already owned the place. They thought I was resting, but I was listening. Every word, every smug remark, was another thread in the net tightening around them. Melissa laughed at one point. She doesn't even check her mail. She'll never know what's coming next. Oh, but I would, because the police already did. Coming back home after weeks in the hospital should have been a relief. My house, with its creaky wooden floors and the scent of lavender polish I always kept on the furniture, had always been my sanctuary. But when I stepped inside that day, leaning on my cane, it didn't feel like mine anymore. David carried my bag in, setting it carelessly on the floor, while Melissa walked through the rooms as though she were inspecting property she had just purchased. Her eyes lingered on the china cabinet, the framed photographs, the piano in the corner. She ran her fingers across the keys, striking a note that rang sharp in the air. Still out of tune, she muttered. We'll need to get rid of it. I gripped my cane harder, biting the inside of my cheek. That piano had been my late husband's pride. He couldn't play a song to save his life, but he loved to hear me play on quiet evenings. To Melissa, it was just furniture to be tossed aside. Mom, David said loudly, breaking the silence, we'll take care of everything. You just focus on resting. His voice carried that falsely sweet tone I'd come to recognize, the one that made my stomach twist. I nodded and lowered myself into my chair by the window. My body ached, but my mind was sharper than ever. From that spot, I could see both the street outside and the performance inside. That evening, they insisted on making dinner. Melissa brought out expensive cuts of steak, wine I'd never buy on my budget. She set the table as though it were a celebration. Cheers, she said, raising her glass once we were seated. To fresh starts and new beginnings. Her eyes darted to the car keys she'd placed boldly in the center of the table, as though daring me to ask. I sipped water instead of wine, watching them carefully. They laughed together, talking about road trips, vacations, shopping sprees, all built on the foundation of money that wasn't theirs. For a while, I said nothing. I let their words fill the air like smoke, suffocating but revealing. Every sentence showed me how far they'd gone, how little remorse they carried. At one point, David leaned back and said, "You know, Mum, it's better this way. You don't need to worry about finances anymore. We'll handle all of that." Melissa smiled, her fork hovering over her plate. "Yes, you should be grateful. We're thinking ahead for you. This house, your pension, your situation. We're making sure it all goes to good use, grateful." The word almost made me laugh. They wanted me to thank them for stealing from me, for treating me as though I were already buried in the ground. I let my cane tap once against the floor, a sharp, deliberate sound. Both their heads turned toward me. "You're right," I said slowly, my voice calm. "It is better this way. I've learned a lot these past weeks. About life, about family." David smiled, clearly pleased with himself. Melissa raised her glass again. They had no idea what those words really meant. The rest of the meal passed with them chattering, while I stored every sentence in my memory. The police had told me to let them keep talking, keep acting, and so I did. I smiled faintly, nodding when appropriate, all the while imagining the moment the mask would crack. After dinner, Melissa began clearing the table, humming to herself. David lingered, leaning his elbows on the wood, looking at me with something close to pity. "You don't need to worry anymore, Mum," he said softly. "Just leave everything to us." I met his eyes then, letting him see a flicker of steel behind my tired expression. "Oh, David," I whispered. "You'll be surprised how much I still worry." He frowned, not quite understanding, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as I lay in my bed, the sounds of the new car's engine rumbling faintly from the driveway, I thought of the coming days. They believed they were in control. They thought I was too frail, too naive, too blind to stop them. But what they didn't know was that every word, every action, was being gathered like evidence in a net. And soon enough, that net would close around them. The days that followed were a delicate performance. I played the role of the fragile old woman, slow with my cane, polite in my words, grateful for every morsel they placed before me. Meanwhile, I watched them parade around my house as if they were already the rightful owners. David spent his evenings polishing the car in the driveway, running his hands across its sleek curves like a proud teenager with his first vehicle. Melissa filled the rooms with shopping bags, clothes with price tags that made my stomach turn, perfumes that cost more than my monthly groceries. They didn't even bother hiding it anymore. But then, one Friday morning, their confidence cracked. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in my hands, when David stormed in, his face flushed. "Mum," he snapped, throwing his phone down on the table. "What did you do to the accounts?" I looked up, feigning confusion. "Accounts?" Melissa followed behind him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Don't play dumb. The cards are frozen. We tried to make a payment yesterday and it was declined. Everything's blocked." I let the silence stretch, watching their panic twist into frustration. Then I set my teacup down carefully and folded my hands. "I did what any responsible person would do," I said quietly. "I protected what was mine." David's jaw tightened. "Yours? You don't even use half of it. You don't need that kind of money. We're building a future, and you're just sitting on it." Melissa's lips curled into a sneer. "Honestly, Ruth, at your age, what's the point? You don't need a luxury car. We do. You don't need travel or nice things. You should be grateful we're making good use of it." Grateful. Again with that word. It ignited something deep inside me. I leaned forward, letting my cane rest against the table, and spoke with a steadiness that surprised even me. "Do you know where I was when you used that card?" I was in the ICU, fighting for every breath. And while machines kept me alive, you whispered that I wouldn't last long. You counted me out. You stole from me while I lay half dead in that bed. Their faces paled. Melissa tried to laugh it off, but it came out brittle. You must have misheard. You were on medication. You don't know what you're saying. But David knew better. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. This is ridiculous. We're family. Families share. Why should you keep all that money locked up when we're the ones struggling? I reached for the folder I had prepared days earlier. Slowly, deliberately, I slid it across the table. Bank statements, transaction records, screenshots of transfers into Melissa's account. Struggling? I said, my voice sharpening. This doesn't look like struggle. This looks like theft. And it doesn't matter if you're my son or a stranger on the street. Theft is theft. Melissa's hand trembled as she flipped through the papers. The colour drained from her cheeks. This doesn't prove anything, she stammered. Oh, it proves enough, I replied. Enough for the police. Enough for the courts. David slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this to us, Mom. You're losing it. You're old, confused. You don't even know what you're signing anymore. If this goes to court, they'll see you're not capable of handling your own finances. I stood then, leaning on my cane, my body shaking not from weakness, but from fury. I may be old, David, but I am not confused. I know exactly what you did, and so do the police. They've been waiting for this moment. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps that made Melissa jump. David's eyes widened. Who's that? I didn't move. I didn't need to. The door opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped into the kitchen. David Whitman? Melissa Whitman, one of them asked, their voices firm. We need to speak with you regarding financial fraud and unauthorized use of Mrs. Whitman's accounts. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face drained of all colour. Melissa's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. I gripped my cane tighter, my heart pounding, and whispered, almost to myself, You thought I was weak. You thought wrong. The kitchen, once filled with their laughter and arrogance, turned as silent as a church at midnight. The only sound was the steady tap of my cane against the floor as I slowly lowered myself back into my chair. Melissa was the first to speak, her voice high and panicked. This is a mistake. We didn't steal anything. We're family. You can't arrest us for using family money. The taller of the 2 officers didn't flinch. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket. Ma'am, we have documented proof of unauthorized transactions, including large withdrawals and a vehicle purchase using an account not belonging to you. That constitutes theft and fraud. Being family doesn't make it legal. David's face flushed red as he shoved the chair back, his hands balled into fists. You don't understand. She's old. She doesn't need this money. We were just helping her use it before I what, David? My voice cut across the room, sharper than the cane I leaned on. Before I die? Before I finally get out of your way so you can live your life in luxury while I rot in a hospital bed? He froze, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. For the first time in weeks, I saw something on his face other than arrogance. Shame. Melissa tried another tactic. She leaned forward, her tone softening, her hands trembling dramatically. Ruth, please. You know us. We've always cared for you. We were worried. And maybe we made some bad choices, but we never meant... I slammed my palm on the table, making her flinch. Don't you dare use that word with me. Care? You cared enough to steal the very thing I worked for my entire life. You cared enough to whisper over my hospital bed that I wouldn't last much longer. That wasn't care, Melissa. That was greed. The shorter officer stepped forward, producing a small folder from his jacket. He set it down in front of me, and I recognized the paperwork Samuel, my lawyer, had provided. Copies of every suspicious transaction, signed complaints, and sworn affidavits. Mrs. Whitman, he said gently, we'll need to take their statements at the station. If you'd like, you can accompany us later to give your formal testimony, but I assure you, we have enough here to proceed. David's composure cracked. He lunged forward, pointing at me. You can't do this, Mom. You're ruining everything. You're supposed to be on our side. We're family. I met his eyes, my voice steady. Family doesn't drain your accounts while you're unconscious. Family doesn't treat you like you're already buried. You stopped being my family the moment you decided my life was worth less than a car. Melissa's tears finally came, streaking her mascara down her cheeks. But even her sobs felt hollow, more for herself than any regret. The officers moved efficiently, reading them their rights as neighbours gathered quietly outside, drawn by the flashing lights of the patrol car. Curtains shifted, whispers spread. People who had known us for decades watched as my son and his wife were led out in handcuffs. David twisted back to me one last time, his voice breaking. "How could you do this to your own son?" I tightened my grip on the cane, steadying myself as I stood tall. "No, David. How could you do this to your mother?" The door closed behind them, and the house fell into silence once more. For a moment, I leaned heavily on my cane, every muscle trembling from the release of tension I'd been carrying for weeks. I wasn't triumphant, no. The weight in my chest was far too heavy for that. But there was a deep, undeniable sense of justice. I made my way to the window and peered out as the squad car pulled away. Melissa's face was pale and streaked with tears. David sat rigid, staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to comfort him. He wasn't a boy who had fallen off his bike. He was a man who had chosen betrayal. Behind me, the house was quiet. No laughter, no clinking glasses, no false sweetness. Just peace. Fragile, yes, but peace nonetheless. That night, I sat in the same chair by the window, the folder of evidence still on the table. My lawyer would handle the rest. The police would see justice through. And me? I would rest. Not because I was weak, but because I had finally reclaimed what they thought they'd stolen. My dignity, my control, my life. I whispered into the empty room. "You thought I wouldn't last. But I did. And I'll last long enough to make sure you never forget this." The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet I hadn't felt in months. Not the suffocating silence of betrayal, but the peace of knowing the storm had finally passed. For the first time since my collapse in the ICU, I slept through the night without waking to the sound of whispered greed or the image of my son's face twisted with entitlement. The next morning, I brewed my own coffee, slowly, savouring the rich aroma filling the kitchen. I carried the mug to the table, sat by the window, and let the warmth seep into my hands. It felt ordinary, and in that ordinariness, there was comfort. The police called later that day to update me. David and Melissa had been formally charged: financial elder abuse, fraud, and theft. They'd been arrogant enough to sign my name on loan documents connected to the car. That alone carried consequences they hadn't imagined. My lawyer, Samuel, assured me I wouldn't lose a cent. In fact, the law was firmly on my side, but the money was never the deepest wound. What cut me was realizing that the people I'd given my life to would rather see me buried than see me strong. Recovery wasn't easy. My body still ached from the hospital stay, and my trust was in tatters. But step by step, I built myself back up. I took walks in the mornings with my cane tapping softly against the pavement. I learned to cook smaller meals for myself without setting an extra plate. And in the evenings, I sat with Maria Alvarez, my faithful neighbour, sipping tea as we watched the sun fade behind the rooftops. "You're stronger than you realise," she told me one evening, her hand covering mine. I smiled faintly. Maybe I just forgot I still had fight left in me. She shook her head. "No, Ruth. You didn't forget. They just underestimated you." Her words stayed with me. For so long, David and Melissa had treated me like a burden, someone to be managed, controlled, dismissed. But I wasn't any of those things. I was still me, a woman who had weathered more storms than they could ever imagine. I didn't cut ties out of rage, though some might have expected me to. I cut them because peace is worth more than any reconciliation built on lies. My phone stopped ringing with their numbers, and for that, I was grateful. The empty space they left behind was soon filled with friends, neighbors, and even strangers who heard my story and offered support. One afternoon, I sat at the piano Melissa had once mocked and played a simple tune. My fingers stumbled at first, stiff from disuse, but soon the melody filled the room. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, the sound of resilience. Now, as I sit here telling you my story, I want to speak directly to those of you listening. Maybe you've faced betrayal. Maybe you've been dismissed because of your age, made to feel invisible or powerless. I want you to hear me clearly. You are not powerless. Do not let anyone convince you that your years make you weak. Experience is strength. Survival is proof. And your dignity is worth protecting, no matter the cost. If you're watching this, let me know where you are. What city? What town? What corner of the world you call home? Because stories like mine don't just happen here. They happen everywhere. And when they do, silence only gives power to those who betray us. I sometimes wonder if David and Melissa ever think about what they lost. Not the money, that was never theirs to begin with, but the trust, the bond, the love of a mother who once would have given them the world. In the end, they traded all of that for leather seats and shiny paint. And when the car is gone, when the court dates are over, when the dust settles, all they'll be left with is the memory of the day their own mother refused to stay silent. I glance at the cane resting by my chair, the symbol of both my fragility and my strength. I pick it up, stand tall, and smile to myself. They thought I wouldn't last, I whisper, but here I am,